Whatever qualms anyone may have had about legalizing pot, few disputed the idea that it would bring in tax revenues big time. But now, in the second year of legal cannabis sales, that financial windfall for the provincial coffers has yet to materialize. Instead, it turns out Ontario lost money in its first year of pot sales. With us now on the highs and lows of legalization so far, gosh, that's an awful pun. In San Diego, California, Bruce Linton, founder and former co-CEO of Canopy Growth. And here in our studio, Jay Rosenthal, founder and president of the industry platform Business of Cannabis. Pamela Jeffrey, member of the Ontario Cannabis Policy Council and chair of the Fire and Flower Ontario Advisory Board. And Vanmala Subramaniam, business reporter at the Financial Post, and it is great to have all of you here in our studio today. I think we got 3 first-time guests here in the studio.
That's right.
So lovely to see everybody here. Bruce, thanks for making time for us from San Diego. We're glad to have you on the program as well. And let's get started with this. Years from now, when we reflect back on the year that was, becoming the first G7 country to legalize cannabis sales, how would you say the first chapter of this book has been going so far? Pamela.
I would say that there has been opportunity lost, Steve. I would say that we had a great opportunity as the first G7 with legalization to unlock a lot of economic growth, and we are not doing that, and we need to be doing that.
Jay, follow up. What would you say?
I'd say medium, maybe better than you described. I think medium. I think the first is that we actually did it. That is a very difficult thing to do. If it was easy, all the other G7 countries would have done it. The United States, most notably, would have done it on a national scale, not state by state. So we did it. That's the first thing. Have we had trip-ups? Have we had roadblocks? Absolutely. And I think we'll address those in full year 2. Full year 1 was rocky, for sure, but we did it. We're through the first year. We're on to the second. I'm bullish on what's ahead, even though I think we can lament what's happened in the previous year.
Bruce, how about you?
So maybe, is porridge too hot, porridge too cold? Maybe I think it's just right. When I look at the year, a little bit, yes, we got out of the gate, but no one right now is in the street with placards protesting a really bold decision. As far as I can tell, people are still going to work and life's pretty normal. And what they're going to do is build from maybe the product could have been a bit different, the packaging a bit different, whatever. But they're going to build from an initiation and fill more stores with more and better products starting in January. And when we reflect on it in 5 years, a majority of the G7, G20 won't have done this, and so we'll still look quite bold.
Okay, Vanmala, you're the only one here who doesn't have a direct interest in this, so let's see what your take is.
Well, I think, I'm more along the lines of agreeing with Jay and Bruce. I think it's pretty surreal if you think about it, that cannabis is legal in Canada, and we're just the second country in the world to have done that. So even sometimes when I'm walking on Queen Street in Toronto and I go into a legal shop, I think about it and I'm like, well, a year ago we didn't have that. However, there have been a lot of problems, and we'll get into that later in the episode, but there have been a lot of problems that perhaps you could say could have been avoided, could have been fixed. There were also a lot of scandals with companies and a lot of, average retail investors thinking that they were going to do much better in the market, but ending up getting a little bit burned. So I think it depends who you ask. But overall, if you take a look at the entire kind of year of legalization, I would say it's been a pretty interesting experiment.
Well, I don't know if this next question comes under the category of burned or scandalous or interesting or what, maybe all of the above. But if the unpredictable nature of this business were ever more apparent than our guest in San Diego, I'm not sure what it would be. Ousted as the CEO of the company you founded. Now, Bruce, I don't want to have you take us through chapter and verse of the whole thing, but I mean, that's a pretty good indication of how unpredictable this business has been over the past year, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's probably a bunch of things are indicated there. Like, most of the capital that we received, the last check was about $5 billion. For 17% of a then 5.5-year-old company, came from big older companies which make what they call earnings per share. So essentially the businesses might be growing moderately, but they have very strong cash flows and they're trying to say, what should I do with the money? And so when those companies put cash into companies that are more like an Amazon, a rapid growth company, my company was living on what's called adjusted EBITDA. Sounds boring, but essentially it doesn't look at how much money do I make per share. It looks at how rapidly am I growing my market share, and how much is that costing is a question. So there's going to be, I would say, conflicts in accounting, and where capital comes from is going to define whether or not there's really ambitious companies or really tightly managed and focus on today and tomorrow, not the overall win over the next decade.
Let me do a quick follow-up with you, Bruce, because I know it cannot have escaped people's attention that headlines have been all over the place at the stock market dip in, well, it's way more than a dip. I mean, the prices have really been sinking over the last few weeks. Can you tell us why you think that's happened?
So it varies by company, right? So a company like Canopy, part of the reason it's down is they're waiting to know who's going to run the place, because there's a transition in leadership, and I would say that capital markets don't like an absence of clarity. In the U.S. ones, it was kind of surprising to me, but I think what happened there is you probably have 10 times more companies operating in America, even though it's federally legal, than you did, say, 3 to 5 years ago. But I don't think there is really many more investors, not that much more capital. So what you're seeing is really a tightening of available capital. For a lot of the Canadian ones, they get lost in the shuffle. We have so many now public companies that, you track the top 4 or 5 names, but after that they go public because it was good for a banker, and then they trade 50 or 70,000 shares a day, which is really not a market. I think you're going to see a real stratification over the next year, where there are the companies that create goods that are finished goods, like a beverage or chocolate or medical products, and they're going to do, I think, well, assuming their products are good. And then you're going to have a whole bunch of others that got stuck sort of at the small farming stage.
Well,
and,
we shall see.
I would think that's going to be tough.
As here was the headline in your newspaper, or at least one of the headlines: Canopy growth plunges to record low after revenue drops most since cannabis legalization. We're going to bring up a chart from one of the articles that you wrote. You can see it here in the studio on the monitor there. And for those listening on podcast, we're basically tracking 4 different companies here. And this is a graph that indicates that Canopy's line is just, after a bunch of squiggles at the top, it's gone down and down and down, and very dramatically. Aurora Cannabis is down, Kronos Group is down, Tilray is down. What's going on here?
Yeah, so just to clarify, the chart shows the market capitalization of these companies. I mean, it tends to go in line with the stock price. So it's basically how much the value of the companies have come
what
down.
they're worth.
Right. So in the case of, let's just take, Bruce is right, we can't lump them all together, but let's just take the big companies, the ones on the chart. They have seen declining revenues quarter by quarter. So Canopy, for instance, if I'm not mistaken, the second quarter in a row that it's seen declining revenues, and this specific quarter, the revenues were down by about 15% because there were a couple of issues with certain products that had to be returned by the province to Canopy because they really weren't selling well, plus macroeconomic factors of the price of weed declining. So companies have to make pricing adjustments to take that into account. So we're starting to see declining revenues amongst Canadian companies, and the market is reacting to that, saying, well, we kind of thought that this would just be up, up, up forever. And now we're seeing these companies kind of stall a little bit, and they're stalling for various factors.
Well, let's, Pamela, follow up on that. I wonder if the whole thing wasn't overhyped from the beginning. What do you think of that?
Well, I think that this is a brand new industry. And so there was hype because this is the very first time, right, that we have an industry, legal cannabis. And so there was a lot of hype. And I think that the next step is going to be crucial that the Ontario government is going to take with respect to what that licensing process is going to look like.
We're going to get to that.
That
that's
is
been controversial.
Very controversial.
Jay, what do you think in terms of whether or not this stuff was all overhyped to begin with?
I don't know that. I mean, people like buying cannabis. People like buying cannabis stock. It was a very cool thing to buy. It was the first time you could do it legally. People wanted to do it. That sends stock prices up. In terms of how it's rolled out, and I think this is actually important to that chart and how we look to the future, is we legalized cannabis here in Canada and basically said 50 to 60% of you can't actually buy it legally in a store in Ontario, right? The only concentration of stores in Ontario is in downtown Toronto. That's not good enough. We only have 24 stores in the largest province. We need to be able to sell more at retail, sort of bricks and mortar. And until or unless we do that, 2 things are going to happen. 1, the revenues to these companies, which are primarily selling in Canada, are not going to be good enough. And 2, the illicit market or the legacy market is going to continue to thrive because the legacy market loves gaps. Right now, there's a huge gap in retail and a huge gap in actual products that people really, truly love and want. And until or unless we fill those two gaps, we're going to see some similar numbers moving forward.
I'm going to follow up on that in just a second. But Bruce, I don't want to get away from the fact that because the stock price is so low right now, and if you think this thing has a future, you know, this is obviously a buying opportunity for some. Would you advise, given where the share prices are, would you advise people to get in right now?
Yeah, selectively, right? If you were looking at this trade 2 years ago, you could basically buy, you know, the market was hot and the companies in the market were didn't matter. You could buy any of them and win. I think now people have to look and say, who can make products that you would stand in line to buy that are not just dried cannabis? And so there's going to be a handful for that. And you know, today, I don't know, the stocks have been moving around today. They're up 20% at one point in time. So it's still a volatile sector. So if people do get in, they've got to be willing to see like 20% volatility on a company like Canopy. Suppose the market cap today is $9 billion, right? Having a 20% variation in your price in a morning of trading, a day of trading is quite unbelievable. So if you're getting in, you better, it's one of those areas that you should buckle up and kind of look at them every quarter, not every hour.
We want to show a chart here that really reflects where the province of Ontario is vis-a-vis other provinces in the country. And again, for those listening on podcast, I'll describe this. Alberta has 329 retail outlets, and there's Ontario in the middle of the pack with 24. Okay? Alberta's got more than 10 times as many outlets as the province of Ontario. And in fact, if you look at the top 5, Alberta, British Columbia, Saskatchewan, Quebec is in there, and then Manitoba, 4 of the top 5 are all in the West. The territories, perhaps not surprisingly, down at the bottom of the pack there. But, you know, those in the province of Ontario who have hoped to see a lot more activity on this front have been sort of bitterly disappointed so far. To put it another way, Alberta has 1/3 of Ontario's population, but 13 times the number of stores as the province of Ontario does, and they sold, despite having, again, a significantly smaller percentage of population, they sold about the same amount of cannabis as Ontario did. All right, Pamela, let's get into this. How is it possible that you know, Doug Ford went to the border. He put signs up saying open for business. What's going on here?
So what's going on, Steve, is let's look at the number of stores. So in Colorado, we have a number, which is 1 store for every 10,000 people. So if we take our population of 14 million in Ontario, we should have 1,400 stores. And those 1,400 stores would have 1,400 general managers, 20,000 employees. You're absolutely right. It's about the lack of access that customers have to the product that is convenient.
Who do you blame for that?
Well, we're looking to the province of Ontario to address this. And we're hopeful that through action that they're going to take, specifically around that supply issue, and having a transparent plan and a timeline to move towards open allocation based on merit, is going to do what is necessary and important to help kickstart this industry. Because you've seen Alberta, they've kickstarted the industry.
Well, they sure have. What I'm reading between the lines there is that you think this whole, and Jay, I'll follow up with you, the whole system that we have in place right now, which is basically a lottery, you know, throw your name in a hat and you cross your fingers. Well, I shouldn't say, I should ask. What do you think of it?
Well, I think they spent more time putting up those open for business signs than they actually did to give thought to how we're actually going to open cannabis stores. Yeah. I think that's actually part of the challenge. Secondly, they came into power in 2018 in the midst of a rollout plan of a different sort of retail cannabis here in Ontario. It was going to be LCBO type of model. They scrapped that and went with this other model, which was going to be free market. Great. And then promptly followed that with a lottery, which made absolutely no sense. And we're still stuck at 24 stores in Ontario. It's just not enough.
Tell me why you think the lottery made no sense.
Well, it was $75 and an email address essentially got you a license. Or potentially, if you got pulled from a hat, there were 17,000 people that put their names in, and 25 were pulled. 24 of those stores have opened up. Okay, that was last April. We're ways away from that now, and we still haven't opened the next round of stores. There is no excuse. The excuse early on was the supply wasn't there. That excuse is no longer valid. Obviously, other provinces are doing better. There's more stores in the city of Calgary than in all of the province of Ontario.
Bruce, what ought we to learn? What should people in the province of Ontario be learning, or perhaps more particularly, the people who make the decisions in the government of Ontario? What should they be learning from other provinces in Canada as to how to improve their act?
Yeah, they need to let the private sector get rolling. And I think I saw something come across the wire this morning that said the province expects to see, starting January 1, opening it up. So 700 to 1,000 stores is their target. It's going to be more municipality involved. So, that will get fixed up. But I would say a key thing when I look at the stores right now, in January, the selection of products those stores have will become very compelling as a reason to go there. And if you're going to turn the corner on the illicit market, you can't just have more stores selling half the products that exist in the illicit market or less. You need to have both more stores and more products. And I think, those things are merging together as we get to 2020.
Pamela, do you want to add something there?
Yeah, I do. So I think what Bruce just said is really relevant, of course, because what we're seeing is customers want to be educated. They've got questions they want to ask, and they want to ask those questions of someone who is knowledgeable and trained. And I think what's great about rolling out the stores is that Ontarians are going to have a chance to conveniently go into a store and ask questions of trained staff and buy products off a shelf knowledgeably.
That does raise a bunch of questions about whether or not the people who actually knew this business were allowed to be in this business. I'm going to come back to that in a second. I do want to find out from Pamela, how is it possible to lose money doing this?
That's a really good question. So, part of the answer is what Jay alluded to. So in 2018, we had a government change, and the Ontario Cannabis Retail Corporation had already signed all these leases and put in, kind of had all these overhead costs for stores they thought the provinces were going to run. And that didn't end up happening because the Ford government moved towards a private retail model. So if you actually look at the breakdown of how that 42 million loss came about, revenue was 63 million. They didn't make money, but their general administrative expenses was so high that, to some extent that added up to the loss. So they are saying it's a loss because of startup costs, and they had to change the model. But it's yet to remain, and we should look at the data in the next 3 months as to how the performance of these stores have been going. Because really, as Pamela pointed out, I think a lot of people prefer coming into stores and buying the cannabis that way instead of buying it online. And right now, the province gets their money from the OCS.ca. They don't have any physical retail stores, right? So, yeah.
$42 million lost.
Yes, and actually, Steve, the Cannabis New Brunswick, the provincially run, online store in New Brunswick, shut down altogether because the model wasn't making sense and they weren't making money. So, there's a precedent that one of a similar model failed. It will be interesting to see what happens here.
I don't want to be unusually harsh on them. They've decided to go a different route. But Jay, do you think is there a reasonable, logical excuse or explanation for losing that much money?
I think so. I mean, not to be flip, but I think so. I mean, you have basically the numbers that you reflect, that $42 million include zero of the sales at bricks and mortar retail. It only goes through the end of March 2019. So the idea that you had all the startup costs and basically none of the benefit of actually selling lots of cannabis would equal a $42 million loss. And I think it's also important to note, if you zoom out a bit, no state, no country, including Canada and including sort of the province of Ontario, has done this flawlessly. My mother just sent me an email that said, after year one in Massachusetts, lots of complaints about how legal cannabis is rolled out. This is not new. This is a difficult thing to get right because unlike alcohol, which has a 100-year history, we know by the day how much alcohol is going to be bought, by whom basically, and where. We know none of that entering cannabis. And until or unless we start to build sort of databases about how long and how much and what types of products people want to buy, we're really just sort of flying blind. And what you see is flying blind for a year. Flying blind year two, you start to be able to see a few things coming down the pike. You start to open more retail stores. You start to learn a lot more. And so I think year two will go a lot smoother than year one. Year three will go a lot better than year two.
Yeah, what's so interesting in Canada is we have different rules by province. And so we've got some great lessons learned from Saskatchewan and Manitoba, for example, where you have strong government regulatory oversight with the private sector able to deliver product and do so in a convenient way for the customer. And I think that model is one where we've had a lesson that we can apply to the rest of the country.
Bruce, how would you sort of compare and all right, so you wanted to make a point. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, we're talking about numbers of stores and models of ownership, but maybe for texture for the audience, my most interesting experiences have been to go to a store, say in Nova Scotia, where it's a store-in-store. What I mean by that is that you walk in the store, and it used to be a liquor store. It still is. But at the back, they have a carved-out area which has cashiers, and it's also a cannabis store. And so if you want, you can pick up your bottle of wine, walk to the back, get your cannabis, and pay for both at the same place. And when I was last there, but you can't pick your cannabis up and walk to the front and pay for it. Apparently, it might get in your pocket or something. But the busy cash registers were at the back, and the not busy ones were the liquor-only ones at the front. Compare that to, say, Newfoundland, where they have a mix of private and public sector, and they have some of these stores now which are kind of the, I'll call it the quick service. It's a gas station which has a cannabis shop and has a small liquor beer area, and then all the other stuff. That starts to me to foreshadow there's a bunch of ways this could work, and we could actually start to have data that shows substitution effect. If you have a great beverage offering that's made with cannabis versus alcohol, and you only have to park your car once and go to that one store, I wonder what the impact will be there. And so I think stores aren't the same despite provinces having different numbers or different ownership models. They actually have different rules of what you can do in the province.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's figure that out. Jay, compare and contrast, if you would, the way Ontario rolled it out with, say, the way you mentioned Colorado a little while ago. So let's pick that one, the way Colorado did it.
Yeah, I think the first is the sheer number of stores. I mean, there's just way more in Colorado. The second is the products that were available when they did open, right? They had certainly dry flower, which we have available here. They had pre-rolls, which we have available here. But they also had edibles and beverages and
Which we do not yet
We
have.
do not yet. And people like those things. They like them a lot. In some of those other jurisdictions, it amounts to 50% of the total revenue. So we've not only in Ontario limited the number of retail significantly. Basically, there's none, except if you live in downtown Toronto. We've limited the number of things on the shelves to really only a portion of what is selling in other jurisdictions. These are the challenges we've had in year one. Many of them will be addressed in year two, but Colorado went from sort of zero to legal, full-fledged with lots of retail outlets, and yet 5 years in, they still have some of these same issues about the legacy market. They have some of the same issues about now they're taking some products off of the shelves. I mean, these things take time. It's not based on sort of we know everything, we're going to do everything all at once. We're learning as we go. And this is, I think, in some respects, a credit to Health Canada to say, we're going to get this right. We know we're going to get dinged for it all across the board, but we're going to do what we're going to do.
Are revenues in Colorado as high as they expected?
I think they just crossed the $1 billion in tax revenue in year 5. It's a smaller state than even the province of Ontario.
Sure.
And we collect more taxes generally when we sell things here. So I think we're going to reach that $1 billion threshold a lot sooner than Colorado did if we can get retail off the ground and when new products come online. So I think we'll be ahead of our sort of cousins to the south. And I think we're doing it in a way that is much more Canadian and much more replicable to other countries than what has happened in the States, which is generally by voter mandate.
Let me put one new item on the table here, which is, and let's harken back to the beginning of this, where, Pamela, we were told one of the reasons was, of course, we're a mature enough country, we can handle this, people want this, et cetera. The other explanation for doing this was there is an illicit/illegal cannabis market, which the government wanted to basically put out of business.
That's right.
Is that happening?
So that's a great question. So Royal Bank issued a report, and in their report, they said that only 12% of the market is legal. So 88% is illicit.
Still.
Yes,
So this has barely made a dent in the illicit market.
that's right, Steve. It's barely made a dent.
Why is that?
That's because we don't have a system in Ontario where we have open allocation, where it is merit-based. That's why the Ontario Cannabis Policy Council is advancing policy solutions that are evidence-based and that are common sense.
For example?
For example, that has to do with a transparent plan and a timeline for the allocation of licenses based on merit.
And that, you think, might put a bigger dent in the illicit market?
Yes, because then consumers, who are ultimately what we're talking about, will have the opportunity to conveniently buy the product, become knowledgeable with a touch point in a store that they can easily get to.
Got it. Bruce, you want in on that?
Well, I think, the guy in the puffy coat and that whole network have had about a 90-year opportunity to develop their supply chain and their customer list. We're comparing that with a year of operating with a limited product set. I think that the transition will keep happening as the better products show up the networks there. But I also think focusing on taxation isn't necessarily what we want to do, I would say, for the first 3 or 4 or 5 years, because if they get too captivated with taxes collected, they'll want to put tax rates up. And that will be a benefit to the illicit market. I do think there are instruments that the provinces haven't been using as much as they could, which are not put people in jail, but actually use fines on landlords and properties, so that if they're actually conducting the sale of cannabis that's illegal or the production of cannabis that's illegal, they get really significant monetary penalties. And if you do that, you affect the cost. And maybe the final thing is really, I've explained, I was in Greece last week and a few places explaining what's going on in Canada. I say, we didn't legalize cannabis. We had that legal before. All we're doing now is regulating, educating, and monetizing. And I think the educating part, they've been pretty captivated about, don't consume and drive, but I haven't seen much education about why the illicit product could have unexpected dangers. We're seeing it with the vape crisis that hit the US, but I think the education on why you may not want to buy from that source, and we'll talk about sprays and fecal contaminants and get down the list of why you want to buy from legal. I haven't seen enough of that education.
Interesting. Van Miller.
Yeah, so I just wanted to make a point about that. I think there are a number of reasons why we haven't made a dent in the illicit market. Sure, price is a factor. Legal cannabis is more expensive than black market cannabis, and access is a factor, that's for sure. But I think quality is a huge factor as well. And when you talk to retailers who are actually, talking to customers, they'll tell you that a lot of the times they can find better quality dried bud on the black market than they can on the legal market. And I think it is possible that it's hard to actually be able to collect data on that because we're only a year into that. But if you talk to people, they just say, I can't find good weed on the legal market. That's really hard to find. And maybe that will change when you have a new array of products coming on. I think vape pens will be a big hit, beverages as well. But I think the biggest issue, and even when you look at the declining revenues of licensed producers and the fact that there's certain product returns, some of these products are being returned because people just don't want it. So I think, yes, the government needs to do its part. The accessibility problem is massive, but I think on the part of licensed producers, they do need to do a better job of collecting market data and just, knowing what their consumers want and what consumer preferences are out there. So,
Pamela.
You're so right. And so one of the issues that we are facing is we do not have commercialization. We don't have relationships between the licensed producers and retailers.
Yes.
So one of the policies that we're advancing and where we'd like to see the province step in is to allow for those relationships, because then the licensed producers can work with the retailers on product, on pricing, and that would take us away from that current state.
Let me delicately and gingerly here raise another issue, which is, we've done numerous programs on this in the past, and one of the things that we've constantly heard is that the people who know this business the best, and I guess they were the people who were running kind of the, illicit shops along the way, they've basically been shut out of the whole thing. And, and basically former politicians have taken it over. There are a lot of former politicians who now sit on boards and who now, some of the people in our most important institutions have kind of taken over that space. People who came late to the party and the folks who really know the stuff have been shut out. True or false?
True, to a large extent. So let me just put some context to that. Yes, what I think should have done is we should have looked at all the existing illegal dispensaries that were in operation and figured out how to license them, as opposed to saying, you guys can't operate at all. We're going to ask people from outside the sector to come in. In Toronto, for instance, you had a real estate agent running a cannabis store. So that kind of doesn't really add up. However, I have to say, and Bruce can probably speak to this better than I can, that some licensed producers have made it a point to reach out to people in the black market who know how to grow and know what, who really just understand the plant and hire them. So I have seen that happen, but I think broadly speaking, the people who fought for cannabis legalization to a large extent haven't been included in the market. I think that's an accurate representation.
Bruce, I don't want to name and shame here, but I am interested in your view on the fact that I know we have a former premier, we got a former finance minister, we got a former health minister, we got a former CSIS commissioner. who are all kind of deeply involved in this stuff. And how fair do we think that is? A police chief as well? Yes, that's right, a former police chief.
Yeah, I think there's a few things there. So the gentleman who's the president of Canopy right now, Rade, he had quite a long and active history in terms of fighting for this outcome. But then when he saw that the outcome was on a track, he got onto it and participated in it. So I think there has been times to play. I think many of the people who are running dispensaries didn't actually want legalization because it diminishes profits possibly. It puts pressure on their business model. You know, where does that product come from? Who tests the product? It's a very uncertain platform. So I think really there's been an open door, but if you actually had a chance to start a business, you could have. There were a lot of people who did, and Rade was one of them. And then he became part of ours, or join. It's never been a barrier to being an employee at Canopy that you had a history both illegally and perhaps with convictions related to cannabis. So I think there's been windows in time. I think the biggest issue has been the ongoing existence of people's criminal history as a negative effect on themselves because of cannabis. And I know there's work to get rid of all of that, but it's too little and too slow.
Okay, with a few minutes to go here, Pamela, let me try one more area of investigation. In what demographic do you see the biggest growth opportunities in cannabis moving forward?
I see two key areas, Steve. One is seniors. So folks who I'm talking to who are buying the product, many are seniors who are buying to treat a bad knee or tendonitis, sleep better. And the other area I see is for women. So with respect to women...
Who have to put up with bad husbands, or what do you mean?
I think women, we have unique health needs that can be met by cannabis, which is great. But also I think women often are the ones who are looking after aging parents, who are looking after children, and they're the go-tos often within families around health choices.
Indeed, that's true. I'm going to add a third one to the list, and Bruce, tell me if I'm nuts here. How about pets?
You know what, Steve? I was actually going to say you're nuts. No, I was going to say that my number one, I agree with the elder care, but number two is pets. And it's not just pets, it's any four-legged mammal. A friend of mine trademarked something tested on humans because it's very bizarre. You know, we've had since 2001 a medical system for Canadians who are human, but our veterinarians have not been able to use the product in any way. There have been no trials. And it's very unusual that animals have been disallowed to have something before humans test it for 4,000 years. So I think it's a huge market. There's a bunch of work to be done on dosages and target outcomes, but when I get old or I have an old dog, there's not a lot of difference between me when I'm old and the old dog. We're gonna, I'll be anxious. I won't sleep well. I probably won't have a great appetite. Like all the things you got to treat for both.
Okay, well said. Jay, finish it up here. Technological innovation. What are the next steps in that regard?
This is, I think, one of the areas where Canada has been leading and will continue to lead for a long time. The way Canada has legalized cannabis has created, out of sort of whole cloth, new technologies that underpin the entire industry, from seed to sale and everything sort of compliance and innovation in agriculture to getting it into products, be they vape pens or edibles or all those things. Because we've legalized federally, because the capital markets have been opened, we've actually done some really incredible things, both from the product manufacturing and sort of agriculture perspective, but also from the use perspective. There's a company that is, I like to call them the Fitbit of cannabis, that actually allows you to track your use. It's called StrainPrint. It's based right here in Toronto. And the idea that you could actually track your outcomes based on certain strains, certain ingestion methods for certain outcomes is really something that we're going to really dive deep on here in Canada, and the rest of the world is looking for us to do all those things, and we have a unique advantage to do that. Whether or not we're going to be supplying the world of cannabis or not, the underpinning of the industry, I think, is what the world is looking for, and that is super exciting to us.
Gotcha. Mr. Director, could I have a four-shot, please, to finish off this wonderful discussion so that I can thank Bruce Linton in San Diego, California, Jay Rosenthal, Pamela Jeffrey, Vanmala Subramaniam, all of you for coming into TVO tonight and helping us out with this. Thank you so much.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.